Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This is the East Asia Strategic Landscape, Power Dynamics and Regional Dialogue panel. My name is Cameron Hunter. I'm a researcher at the University of Copenhagen on the European Research Council funded project Ritual Deterrence, where I look at US-China nuclear deterrence dynamics. And I'm joined today by a small but perfectly formed panel of three experts to comment on the state of play in the region. I've been told to give a brief overview of the topic. I'm sure if you've joined us at this early hour on the topic, I'm sure you're already familiar, but we're looking at a region which there are perhaps early signs or already fairly strong indicators of an arms race dynamic in the nuclear domain between the US and China, which has knock-on effects for the rest of the region. There are a multitude of territorial disputes, and there are really major questions on the future of diplomacy in the region, both in terms of institutions and bilaterally. So with me today, we have Melissa Conley-Tyler, who has extensive experience as a practitioner and in think tanks, with an expertise particularly on Australian foreign policy, Australia's key relationships across Asia, and the practice of diplomacy. We have Professor Michiru Nishida, who specializes in nuclear arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, with a focus on Japan. And we also have Professor Hua Han, who is an expert on, you shouldn't give academics these kinds of jobs, who is a specialist in arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. So I'm going to be asking each of the panelists a starting question, and they will give us an overview of their thoughts on this particular topic. And as rapidly as possible, we will be moving to audience questions, where we are very hopeful that you will be providing us with some interesting perspectives as well. And I think we're all looking forward to having an enjoyable and thought-provoking dialogue on this. So, Melissa, we often frame East Asia's power dynamics as centered on US-China competition. But from your vantage point, what is the single most significant destabilizing effect this competition is having on regional stability today? How are smaller nations adapting their security and economic hedging strategies? How might Australia's foreign policy evolve in light of growing minilateralism, such as AUKUS, in the Indo-Pacific, especially concerning its US alliance and its engagement with other regional powers like China and India?
So I've got a big grouping there. I've got East Asia power dynamics, US-China competition, regional destabilisation, and Australian foreign policy. Happy to cover all of that. But where I'm going to start is actually with a poppy. Now, I think all the Europeans here will be very clear why I'm wearing a poppy today on the 11th of November, on Armistice Day. You may be surprised by what an issue it is for Australia. As a very young country, we were only formed as a country in 1900. We sent a huge number of people to fight in the First World War. I think there are something like 13,000 young Australians who are buried in Flanders Field. And for us, that turned into a real determination to remember what the cost of war is. To this day, when I bring visitors to Canberra, I show them the War Memorial, I show them the painting of all the Australian dead rising from Menin Gate, Ypres Memorial. And it certainly was a huge issue for Australia in our historical memory. But then I think to myself, Han Jiashao, this means something quite different, doesn't it? So 15 years ago, UK Prime Minister David Cameron, on this day, was visiting China. And he wanted to come into the Great Hall of People in Beijing, wearing one of these poppies? And he was told an absolute no. It was a diplomatic standoff for some time and almost derailed the whole visit, because to Chinese people, this means opium war. This means Europeans coming and tearing their country apart, tearing apart one of the great civilizations. And they still remember it as a century of humiliation. Now, I'm starting with that because I think Europeans often think they have a bit of a monopoly on history and memory. And I want to remind that actually East Asia has an awful lot of it too. China counts itself as a 5,000-year-old civilization. China, Japan and South Korea have been the three brothers trying to manage their relationship for millennia, until Japan made it all very difficult by conquering and occupying both of the other brothers. So that's a long way of starting with, when you're talking East Asia power dynamics, there's a lot of history, and it's not just about US-China. Okay? We may start there and think that's what it's about, but I'm not sure it is. I think from the perspective of East Asia, and particularly China, what we're in at the moment is this great convergence, where the countries that were pushed back by European colonialism are returning to what they see as their normal place in human affairs. So for almost the whole of human history, economic and military power followed population. So the biggest civilizations have been, say, China and India. This broke during the Industrial Revolution, when a small group of people in Europe were able to make the rules and for the rest of the world, because they developed new technologies. Now that time is coming to an end. Demographics is where we are again. And so if you see it in those terms, what you've got is a really big historical shift of the centre of world gravity going back to where it's always been in human history, in the Indo-Pacific, the highly populous Indo-Pacific. Now, I think the organisers made a good call in asking an Australian to come and do this, because I think we have the advantage of both, or disadvantage, of a European history and an Asian present. Okay, so for Australia, we only exist because of European domination. You know, we're the high watermark of European maritime imperialism, as it were, and we've never known any other world. So when you're talking about sort of the destabilisation, we feel that really strongly, and we feel it very strongly in the way that Europeans feel it, that, you know, the world is changing in a difficult way. We've never lived in a world with strong Asian powers, which is difficult for us. It's not true for neighbours. So Vietnam, for example, has lived with a strong China before. It's been invaded by China, it's fought with China, it's learned how you get along and push back against China, but for us it's very new. So it is hitting us hard, you know, this pervasive strategic uncertainty, where the world we know, where we had a great and powerful friend in the form of a European maritime power, has now gone. And that's a new and difficult world for us. Perhaps because of that, but I'm going to be interested if my colleagues see the same, I would actually say that if you ask about the most destabilising factor at the moment, I'd actually say it's the US. Okay, so China has been rising for quite a while, and people who live in the region are really rather aware of it. It's returning to being a great power, it is behaving like a great power. You know, that's not always pleasant. Rising great powers throw their weight around, we get all of that. But the job of middle and smaller powers is to try to, you know, bind those great powers with norms and rules and try to socialise them into something that we find easier to live with. And if you compare, you know, China to some other rising powers throughout history, it's actually been relatively mild, if I put it in those terms, you know. So difficult. But I think the really key issue is actually how the US deals with a rising power, as it were. You know, if the US has been comfortable in its space, it's used to preeminence, it dislikes sharing that in any way, how is it going to cope with a rising China, and what does that mean for all of the rest of us? And so from that perspective, I actually see the US as the factor that destabilises. I'd wondered how the US would respond, and I honestly did not expect what we've got, which I see as a sort of wholesale implosion of the US in so many ways. I think it makes it an extremely dangerous time, because we're trying to work out these new ways of working between. We have I'm going to say mercurial, will we take that? Mercurial US president, which is in itself a destabilising factor. In terms of how Australia is responding to that, so your last point was on Australian foreign policy and things like AUKUS. I mean, Australia's response is we want to keep the US in the region. We find it very worrying that the region might be dominated by one power. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs talks a lot about wanting an Indo-Pacific where no one country dominates and countries have the freedom to choose their own pathways, which is a way of saying, you know, middle and smaller powers come together, make sure that we're just not the feeding ground for the great powers. So if you see it in that way, something like AUKUS, which the Australia, UK, US two-pillar military procurement deal is about, in the first pillar, getting submarines, and the second pillar, cyber, hypersonic and other new technologies. That's all about us paying a lot of money, buckloads of billions of dollars to the US to help US industrial capacity, which is another way of saying, US, don't withdraw completely from this region. We need some sort of balance. Because of all of this, if I can just end on, you know, what I see that around the nuclear side, I think we're just in such a dangerous moment in history. And understanding that previously, great wars have happened precisely when you have a rising great power and those powers don't manage their competition. I hate the fact that we have the legacy of the nuclear weapons stockpiles that we have in the world, which means that any miscalculation can go into existential risk for everybody. So there's a huge, you know, need to be managing that well. Now, I'm going to put fault on both sides. I think China should be doing a lot more to explain why it is increasing its nuclear arsenal. It should be explaining why is there a need for these new silos that are turning up. I mean, we need a lot of reassurance on those things so that they don't become escalatory. I don't think the US helps when it says, oh yes, we'll just resume nuclear testing, whatever that means. But I think we're in this really, really difficult time. So I suppose if I can finish, what I don't want to see is that sometime in the future, we look back at 2025 and we put on our memorial badges or whatever it is to remember the great loss of life because we didn't manage these transitions the way that we needed to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It was very comprehensive and astute remarks. And it seems perhaps a little churlish to ask a follow-up question, but I'm still going to. I think so. I agree with you that we're at a dangerous moment of history, and the final element of our panel title is on regional dialogue. So, what potential do you see for regional dialogue when many of the issues that you mentioned have historically over the past sort of 20, 30 years not really seen much in the way of dialogue between some of the key actors, or perhaps not the depth or institutionalization of dialogue we might see. So what possible pathways are there for something resembling regional dialogue, or perhaps just more dialogue in the region, if that's too much to ask for.
Look, there is a lot of dialogue in the region because a lot of people are trying to manage these tensions, and I've been to US-China nuclear dialogues, for example, where there has been an attempt by middle powers like South Korea, Australia, Japan to say, well, is there a way we can put some pressure on major powers? I think at the moment I would be focusing on crisis management, and that is something that Australia is focusing a lot on. The next term for our Minister of Foreign Affairs, she's really put that as one of the key focuses. I think you can work on sort of risk reduction. I think you can work on crisis management, how we're going to make sure that any of the things that might happen don't escalate into something truly disastrous. I think trying to solve some of the underlying problems, very unlikely. South China Sea issues are all about history and memory, as are the Diaoyu Senkakus, as are, so many things. I don't think solving those issues is on the table, but I think having really robust crisis management to try to keep that within what we talk about guardrails is about all you can hope at the moment.
Thank you very much. Professor Nishida, moving along to your introductory comments, I'd like to ask you, in light of shifting regional security challenges and a growing sense of uncertainty about US reliability, which Melissa has already set us up for a little, how are debates on regional security and nuclear politics evolving in the domestic politics of Japan? Is there evidence of greater strategic autonomy, or do traditional dependencies still shape the discourse?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Cameron, for the question. I'd like to respond from a Japanese security point of view. So first, the security environment in the region has very qualitatively changed over the past decade, and three major trends. One is North Korea, another is China, and Russia. And North Korea, accelerated nuclear and missile programs, as already everybody knows, with more frequent tests, larger missile inventories, and recent aggressive nuclear doctrine, including potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. Of course, China is the biggest factor for Japan's security consideration, and recent rapid military expansion and increasingly assertive behavior around Japan's air and maritime space. With daily scrambles, Japanese self-defense forces daily scrambles against the PLA aircraft, Coast Guard and maritime militia activities around the Senkaku Islands, and rapid deployment of advanced missile systems. And the third factor is Russia, which may not be so well known to European audience, but Russia has revitalized military activities surrounding Japan, and it's especially in Japan's northern front, and also military cooperation with China has been a very big concern to Japanese security community. Russia and China have done a lot of joint bomber patrols surrounding Japan, and that's a very big concern. And of course, Russia's military cooperation with North Korea, potentially giving technology to North Korea, has given a rise to concern for the Japanese security. So these developments together reinforce sense or perception of strategic vulnerability for Japan. And another factor is, of course, as Melissa mentioned, the question of US reliability. I wouldn't say it's a destabilizing factor yet, but certainly uncertainty. And so far, it's not a collapse of trust yet, but rather a new layer of uncertainty. And with U.S. domestic polarization and debates in Washington about burden sharing and allies' contributions, and some discussions in the U.S. questioning the nature of extended deterrence. President Trump has mentioned, even in the second administration, that Japan-U.S. security alliance is very one-sided. This was a very shocking phrase because it was mentioned right after Japan-U.S. summit, the first U.S. summit meeting in February this year, and this remark came in March. At the summit meeting, the declaration was issued, the joint declaration was issued, and that declaration had a lot of very positive elements. All the elements, including, U.S. is committed to extended deterrence, including nuclear and Senkaku Islands and all those things. So it was like 100 points. I mean, it was great. But then just after a few weeks after that summit declaration, President Trump said it's a one-sided agreement. So it was very shocking. So people doubt if President Trump actually looked at the joint declaration or not. He probably doesn't really read that or doesn't really care, but that's how things are. And of course, Trump administration's very transactional approach is very concerning. So these concerns have not led Japan to doubt the alliance fundamentally, yet instead they have intensified debates about what Japan must do to reduce the risks associated with overdependence. But to avoid misunderstanding, this debate started not just recent Trump administration, but over the past decade since the early 2010s. Japan's thinking that what Japan should do or can do to increase its burden sharing has not just started since the Trump administration, but over the past decade, even before the Trump first administration. In that sense, how exactly are debates evolving in Japan? So the first one is strengthening defense capabilities and deterrence capabilities and increasing self-help aspect. For example, doubling defense spending towards 2% of GDP, which seems very low to the European partners, but Japan has been for over the last 5 decades, it has spent only 1% or less than 1% of GDP. So doubling defense budget to 2% is a very big deal. But I think Japan is going to increase even beyond 2% in the near future, probably. And acquisition of counter-strike capabilities and establishment of a permanent joint operation command, and expanding ammunition stockpiles and hardening facilities. Looking at how the war in Ukraine is evolving, Japanese self-defense has learned that we should have more ammunition stockpiles to be able to continue defense. So these moves represent autonomy light, per your question, whether or not Japan is seeking or pursuing strategic autonomy. Perhaps it's not really autonomy in the European sense, but in a bigger picture, it's autonomy light, in a limited way. Not autonomy from the alliance completely, but strengthen self-help within the alliance. And another one is the institutionalization of extended deterrence between Japan and the United States with a regular and upgraded extended deterrence dialogue, which has been upgraded to ministerial level. So Japan is not really distancing itself from the U.S., and including nuclear umbrella, but it is deepening it or strengthening alliance. And also Japan is building horizontal networks that reinforce the alliance, including especially minilateral alliance, not alliance, but the semi-alliances, trilateral alliance, not alliance, but trilateral cooperation between Japan, the US, South Korea, Japan, US, Australia, Japan, UK, Japan, Australia, India, and those things. So this, to the question of whether Japan is pursuing greater strategic and big autonomy, so the term strategic autonomy is often used in European context, and I think that's kind of defined as ability to independently act of the United States, or independent crisis management operations or capabilities, or diplomatic discretion, even when diverging from US choices. So in a sense, one could say the direction Japan is taking is sort of same, but in a limited way, because Japan is still in the structural dependence, especially in nuclear deterrence. There's no option for Japan to take a autonomous nuclear deterrence capability like in Europe, like between France and UK and Germany, that sort of things. That's not an option for Japan. So the only option we have is to deepen the alliance with the United States. So I would say it's more of a alliance embedded autonomy light, not not in a European, not at a European level, but at a limited way, with expanded self-defense capabilities, greater burden sharing, and that sort of things. So, and the latter half of your question about whether or not Japan is still framed with traditional dependencies. So the answer is probably yes and no, because structurally Japan is still dependent on the US-Japan alliance. There's no other option. But the answer is no, because it's not just traditional dependence, but Japan is increasing its capabilities to be able to have more self-help capabilities, which can be said as autonomy, but it's a very more limited way. So, so Japan is just deepening the alliance within the alliance. Strengthening capabilities within the alliance, not really autonomous. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very helpful contribution and clarification, I think, on the way in which Japanese security debates are developing in light of recent events. I wondered if we could really zoom in a little onto sort of Japanese domestic politics. And when you were outlining the big issues in Japanese security politics, each of them kind of comes from a different geographical direction. And what I was thinking was that I imagined that this situation looks very different if you're living in Okinawa to if you're living in northern Japan. So I was wondering if you could share any insights you have on how there might be actually, within Japan, regional differences in how these issues are being prioritized or being thought about. Any insight you can offer on that, I think, would be very helpful for us. Thank you.
So Okinawa is the forefront of the security situation, and so there's still a very strong movement against overburden of U.S. bases in Okinawa, but at the same time they are feeling the security situation has fundamentally or qualitatively changed. So I think they are in a sort of a dilemma. On one hand, they understand the security imperative, but on the other hand, they feel overburdened with U.S. bases, and and also Japanese self-defense forces expanding its bases and activities in Okinawa. So it's a dilemma, and the people in the homeland is a little more relaxed and because of the distance, and that's kind of causing domestic, not division yet, but a little bit of differences in perceptions. And this could be a strategic vulnerability because it could be taken advantage of neighboring countries using disinformation, that sort of narrative warfare. So that's something that we have to really keep in mind. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that was a really helpful additional bit of insight you could offer for us there. Thank you. Professor Han, I'd like to ask you about China, of course. China promotes a new security concept grounded in mutual trust, mutual benefit, and cooperation. How does this vision translate into practice within the East Asian security context? In particular, how does it interact with ongoing tensions and disputes in the South China Sea? And what mechanisms, if any, could help reconcile this rhetoric with regional realities?
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be back to the conference again, and I see friends Francisca and also Toby there. I assume maybe more challenging questions will be on me. But let me start my presentation by talking a little bit about the new security concept. I'm talking about new concept. That means maybe in China, people try to get rid of the old nuclear thinking, for example, the power politics, or society-states trap between established power and rising power, and repeat the circle of power transition. Maybe in many cases prove it's going to be a war in the end. So that's the basic idea why we talk about new. So let me talk about new. Actually, it's not new. It's, I think the idea was there in late 1990s. So 2 decades has passed. But at that time, you can imagine very different scenario or different security environment in China faced. But now we have seen sea change happened in this region. But let me first talk about what the elements inside when they talk about the security concept, new concept. First one for China, I think alignment system is not a good idea. Non-alignment policy maybe helps to solve the disputes, territorial disputes, economic and political disputes. And also, I think UN-centered, UN-centric collective security approach is a proper way for Chinese to think about to deal with security affairs in this region. The second one is a non-zero-sum game thinking. I think positive sum thinking is the way I think China has tried to pursue. Actually, China has done something, for example, to really increase the not trust, but maybe confidence among the countries in this region by economic trade integration, especially when we talk about the RCEP, BRI, and the AIIB. Maybe China is also pursuing a membership in the CPTPP. I think maybe some resistance from Japan about the membership at this moment. The third one is the caution on use of armed forces. I think I have to admit some disputes or the rest of China really causes some concerns. We understand that, but how we can resolve the disputes or some kind of concerns through peaceful negotiation, peaceful consultation. I think that, so I think the Chinese way have two dimensions in this thinking. Firstly, is Weiquan in Chinese, they upholding the rights or on sovereignty, but at the same time, they try to preserve the stability in this region. The balance is very hard to achieve, I have to admit. And fourth one, and the last one, is a cooperative security arrangement in this region, especially the ASEAN-centric security architecture rather than the hub and spoke American-led security architecture. So that's all I think some elements inside the new security concept. But let me talk about something new. When they talk about new security concept, they have to really look at what the reality is now we are facing in this region. But actually, since the Obama's pivot to Asia, I think the strategic landscape in Northeast Asia has undergone really sea change. Not only when we talk about restructuring of a military structure in the US military restructuring in this region, and they say maybe now as well as, I mean, the US emphasizes on forward deployment of his armed forces or equipment. But at the same time, I think they emphasize the resilience and also flexible deployment. So sometimes they think maybe we talk about liability of the alignment between Japan and the United States, but maybe they're talking about another version of Nixon doctrine. They talk about burden sharing and even the offshore balancing game from the United States side. My own understanding of that. But let me talk a little bit more in detail about the military presence. When Melissa just mentioned why China expanded his nuclear arsenal that much. But if you look at the reality, China has facing, I mean, so a large number of military bases in this region, and the personnel, especially in Australia, at the same time, Philippines, you can see so many new military bases. And also, we have seen the improvement or updates of the deployment of military equipment in this region. For example, not now, it's not only the defensive weapon system, but also offensive, Typhoon, and also Tomahawk. And some people also talk about AUKUS framework. Under that is a submarine, nuclear submarine deployment. Also, now we talk about maybe there's another kind of transfer of US nuclear submarines to South Korea. So that's really make the security environment so complicated for China. And also, lastly, we talk about the unilateral alignment system of the United States in this region. Not only hub and spoke, but now it's a mini-lateral military exercise. So that's another way we look at the offshore balancing strategy of the United States. So let me talk about the South China Sea a little bit in the end. South China Sea, I know some contentious issue, especially between China and Philippines. But if you really look back to the trajectory of this efforts on resolution, you can see three themes through the decades. The first one is the diplomatic approach rather than military conflict has been the core in the efforts for China to settle the disputes among the claimant states, even the growing military capability of China, but just try to prevent some real escalation of conflict with the Philippines. I think two achievements maybe have already gained. The first one is the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea in 2002. Even people tend to believe it's nothing important. Maybe the code of conduct is more important than the declaration, but I still think by reaching that kind of arrangement really improve the stability in South China Sea arena. And also now we are still in the process with other claimant states on the code of conduct negotiation. It has been very difficult, but those countries have already readmitted their commitment to the earliest finalization of the draft, maybe by next year. So the second theme, very short, theme is a dual-track approach for China to engage in the South China Sea issue. On the one hand, for the territory disputes in the maritime domain, China has engaged in the diplomatic consultation and negotiation with the claimant states. On the other, I think on the regional security and stability issue in the South China Sea, I think China has conducted or engaged in consultation or dialogue with ASEAN countries as a whole. So I think both things, they have really seen consistently in the efforts. Lastly, about the regime or new mechanism. I still think the mechanism has been there quite a number of APEC or ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3, and also other bilateral, multilateral consultations. I think without new mechanism, I think that the problem is, or the issue is, how we can make this current regimes or mechanism work more effective way. And also, last word, I think the mechanism, for example, we take an example, the six-party talks. When they really push very hard from the reluctancy in the beginning, but later on, China really played a very proactive way to push that regime or the framework forward, but suddenly nothing, resume again. So that's the experience, maybe bad experience for China to really engage to create a new mechanism, but maybe they make the current ones more effectively.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that was super helpful explanation of Chinese perspectives on this. There are lots of possible follow-up questions I could ask and I'd like to ask. I think maybe the most important thing for you to share with this audience perhaps is maybe the one big difference in perception that the US and China have towards each other. So if you could think of...
Difference, perceptions.
Yeah, when they're looking at some of these same events, maybe same decisions, bits of history, that they just view completely differently. What are some of the most important differences of opinion?
I think in my mind, because Melissa just talked about U.S. maybe the biggest stabilizer in this region, but I think for many Chinese, they feel like China now is playing a kind of a stabilizing or except the U.S. maybe. I'm not really exclusively talking about the roles. Who is a more important stabilizer? Maybe they are trained to really make some strategic restraints each other and try to reach some kind of a compromise. For example, we have already seen the compromises between the United States and China on the trade war or tariffs war or financial, all kinds of wars. But happily to say some arrangement they have already reached to really keep the disputes or the strategic competition not from, how to say, from escalating in the very real, how to say, the conflict. Right.
That's a good answer. Thank you, Professor. Well, I mean, we only had 3 experts to cover. I mean, I'm very biased, but I think the most complex and rich region for contemporary arms control and arms control and disarmament issues. Nevertheless, I think we did a fantastic job. I can, you know, I didn't contribute very much to that, I'll admit this, but you know, I think our 3 experts here have really done something very impressive with the small amount of time they had. I think I'm struck most by the intractability of some of the underlying issues that we collectively discussed. Melissa summed it up as, I think, that the kind of long-standing historical issues are not likely to be resolved anytime soon, and I think all 3 panelists kind of agreed on this. My sense was the consensus of the panel was that things are largely going to be an attempt to bolster what we already have institutionally and diplomatically, and that we're also not looking at some kind of great revolution in the way in which affairs are dealt with, which I think Professor Han summed up wonderfully at the end there. And Professor Nishida, I think, also was very helpful for emphasizing that there is a military response that's going on here, and with actors that you maybe wouldn't have expected to be leaning as heavily on the military option in the past, not just Japan, but others in the region also. So with that, I think I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. I think we have a roving mic. I think, should we start at the back there? If you could introduce yourself before you ask the question, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Could you put your hands up again so that the lady can find you for the question? Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you to all the panelists for your remarks. My question is to Melissa. You mentioned AUKUS in your initial remarks and the need for other such regional groupings to counter the Chinese threat. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on the Quad grouping with India and Australia being members, and India especially, desperately at this point looking to counterbalance the Chinese influence in the region, in the Asia Pacific. But we know that the progress there has been very slow. So my two questions are: firstly, how does Australia view the Quad grouping and the possible role of India in the region? And secondly, what, according to you, are some of the key areas that the Quad members can sort of leverage to strengthen their economic and strategic partnerships in the region? For example, we know that there have been talks about a framework for critical minerals with, all the four members sort of looking to reduce their reliance on China. But as we know that that is a long way. That's a long way ahead. So, yeah, just your thoughts on these two questions. Thank you.
Okay, Melissa, are you happy to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd probably say that both AUKUS and the Quad are smaller than they appear in most people's imagination. I don't think they're serious attempts to counter Chinese threats. If we were really doing that, we'd be doing something a lot bigger than either of these things. So AUKUS is just a military procurement agreement. Australia has always got almost all of its military hardware from the US. We've always had submarines. We have 6 at the moment. If AUKUS works, we finally get 8. It's hardly a massive change in our posture. In fact, I think of AUKUS as meaning that we will have no submarines whatsoever, because we won't be able to keep our Collins class going long enough for the AUKUS ones to come. So I don't think that's... If you were serious about doing something about a Chinese threat, you would do something quite different than AUKUS. I feel the same with the Quad, honestly, that it's nice at a leader's level. It looks good for all of them. They love having the sort of, we're the superheroes coming together, saving the world. If you take it to its essence, it's about offering some public goods to countries that might be swayed into more of Chinese sphere of influence. So we're saying, we'll do a program on maritime domain awareness so that all of the Southeast Asian and Pacific countries, they'll work with us rather than China, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's pretty mild. It's not as if we're doing a huge amount together. It's not as if we're dramatically changing our postures. From Australia's perspective, the Quad is all about India. It's actually, weirdly, it's not so much about China, it's not about the other partners. We already have a long-term alliance with the US, we have trilateral dialogues with the US and Japan, we have now an enormously strong defence relationship and many other areas with Japan. So we don't need the Quad for any of those things. The idea of the Quad is to bring India in, to say, you're coming from a very different tradition, from a non-aligned tradition. You don't tend to see many of the international issues in the same way as we do. So come in and be more connected with us. So from our perspective, that's what the Quad's about. India is vitally important to us. We see it as extremely important to create that equilibrium that, a rising India is there to counterbalance other strong powers. And so the Quad is about bringing India in and building those habits of cooperation.
Thank you, Melissa. I was wondering if either of the other two panelists wanted to make any comments on the same issue, any comments about your areas of expertise and the relationship with India or the Quad? Professor Han.
I agree with what Melissa just said, response to the question. And one more point I want to add on is if you have, read through all the joint statements through the summit meeting of the Quad, you can see the agenda is really broad. It's not only security issue, but also vaccine or some supply chain or public health, smuggling, piracy. So many issues on the agenda. I still think a very strictly way, I don't think the court is playing a very important military alignment role in this. What's Malacca? No, the joint military exercise. Malabar joint exercise. I have already followed the place of all these exercises. I still think they managed to have, how to say, more, not purely on China, I would say, but more very general security agenda.
Thank you. I have a question here at the front.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. I have a couple of questions, and one for all panelists. You've all talked about sort of regional dialogue, this interlocking defense agreements. Interlocking defense agreements also means entanglement. So if there is a crisis, the expectation is you will all go in together. So when I'm looking at these three countries, put the case there is going to be a massive crisis between China and Taiwan, the first country that Washington will turn to is going to be Japan. Japan is indispensable at the front line with the United States to fight a possible war with China. The second one is probably going to be Australia. And so could you reflect on how you see this entanglement with the United States? I understand autonomy light, but here there is an Indo-Pacific strategy, there is a defense alliance, there is rising tensions. You would probably call if Washington goes into a war with China. What is the debate there, and also the awareness of what alliances actually means, which is also entanglement? But for you, Professor Han, you won't be surprised with this question. Could you tell us how you see the developing relationship with Russia, so China and Russia, and China and North Korea? You have taught me greatly about that there is no such a thing as an axis of upheaval. But I am very curious about how you see the developing of these two relationships. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you briefly introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, Francesca Giovannini, Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think, yeah, in the order we are on the program.
Thank you for that. And I think Australians think a lot about alliances because, you know, we're the weaker partner in the big US alliance, and you're very aware of both entanglement but also abandonment. And that's one of the other big things. That's probably the thing that is more on our mind right at the moment, is the idea that a fickle US that, well, with a president who doesn't like allies and partners, and we've really just got to state it that baldly, how do we feel about being left? We've only got 3 actual military alliances, so the one with the US, which New Zealand left, the 5-power defence agreement, which is in Southeast Asia, and just this year we signed a mutual defence agreement with Papua New Guinea, which is new for us. So yes, we are absolutely thinking about those. When you're thinking about a Taiwan contingency, that is obviously something we think a lot about. AUKUS in particular has been brought into that. So Eldridge Colby has been pushing as part of the review of AUKUS to say if we divert some of the subs that would otherwise go to the US and we send them to Australia, how can we be sure that they will be used in a Taiwan contingency? And quite rightly, as a matter of sovereignty, we say, well, we're not going to pre-commit on that. if you sell us the submarines, they're our submarines, and we decide what we're going to do with them. So from that perspective, certainly our mutual defence agreement with the US does not bind us to go to war in the case of Taiwan. It says, literally, if there is an armed attack on the territory of either country in the Pacific, then we have to consult through our processes on an appropriate response. So that's nothing like a NATO guarantee level, yeah? Just being clear on this. It's very wishy-washy and Taiwan isn't covered.
Melissa, could I just, I have a follow-up. What if an American contingent, what if like Okinawa gets attacked? Would that will count as an attack against an American
Territory, Pacific territory? I don't know. Would you count that as an
Like
American
as a
Pacific
military
territory? I'm
base?
guessing that Nishida-san would not count that as an American territory in the Pacific, but I don't know.
American territory, not American assets.
Professor Nishida.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think there's a little difference between the Japanese security community thinking and also the public perception. But at least in the security community, the entanglement happens only when the US is unnecessarily aggressive towards China and sort of provoke, for example, Taiwan to declare independence or something like that. Then it is an entanglement. But the situation that we have in mind is rather more of a China being more aggressive and tries to take over Taiwan by force. In that case, it's rather this fear of abandonment rather than entanglement. The question is how we can make sure that the US is entangled, because Taiwan contingency is almost Japan contingency, because Taiwan and the island in Okinawa is very, very close. Like the nearest point is like only 100 kilometers. So Taiwan contingency is pretty much Japan contingency. So in that case, we have to entangle the United States rather than we being entangled. So that's a difference, and that's a scenario that we have more in mind, I think.
Professor Han.
Let me talk a little bit about entanglement. Entanglement is the word. Reminds me of the balancing game. They talk about countries between China and the United States. They have some kind of a dilemma between abandonment and entrapment. So entrapment, you have to, how to say, sacrifice your maybe some economic trade relationship with China. But at the same time, if you don't follow what the, how to say, the United States asked to do, maybe you'll be abandoned. So we understand sometimes the dilemma in the decision making among the states in this region, but just don't want them to play a very dangerous game in the co-issue, something like Taiwan. So that's my answer to that question. And about Sino-Russia, Sino-DPRK, we don't like the ox, that terminology at all. And also, I think, you know, what the Chinese translation, when they talk about the bilateral relations between, with Russia, that is a 背靠背, back and back. It's not a hug, right? It's a very delicate way that they think really flex the relationship. Very defensive way, and to deal with threats from outside world. But not necessarily they accommodate each other so closely. For example, the political systems or all the other issues, not necessarily, but also it's a kind of way they manage the security environment together. Also, they also have some kind of a trilateral strategic relationship among maybe the India, China, and Russia, right? So right after some kind of a some disputes, now the strategic triangle among the three countries again back on the table. So it's interesting to really see how the relationship between trilateral relations, not necessarily arcs or some kind of a military alignment, not necessarily.
Thank you. We have a question here in the second row.
Thanks, Raffaele Marchetti, Lewis University from Italy. One question for Professor Nishida. I mean, you didn't talk so much about the relation, the bilateral relation between Japan and China. Can you expand a bit and integrating your security perspective with the economic issues? Of course, the relation in trade terms, in foreign direct investments and human mobility are significant. So how are you going to balance this? And whether in Japan there is the discussion about nuclear developments in policy and security domains. I mean, is there, to what extent is there, and what extent, how advanced are the capabilities and the technical knowledge about this? And for Professor Han, how China is going to advance the declared projects of reunification with Taiwan under the new leadership, with the new leadership of Japan and the current leadership in the US, which is obviously quite a challenging environment. So how are they going to advance the project? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Professor Nishida?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not an expert on the Japan-China relationship, but as far as I understand, Japan is very much heavily invested in the Chinese economy, and the Japan-China economic relationship is very, very, takes probably the largest portion of Japan's foreign trade. So Japan doesn't want to go war with China. Obviously, it's very, the priority for Japan is to avoid any military conflict that would disrupt any Japan-China economic relationship. So how to balance? Yeah, so we have to make sure that nothing disruptive happened in the region so that we can continue economic, benefit from economic relationship with China. But at the same time, we don't want any military contingency over Taiwan that could spill over to Okinawa, because it's same for Taiwan, but for China, Senkaku is part of Taiwan province. So if they take over Taiwan, then they would have to logically take over Senkaku. Of course, it's a different matter in terms of military activity, but logically speaking, that they would have to do something with Senkaku. So that's why for Japan, Taiwan contingency is considered a Japan contingency. Not 100% equal, but almost 90 existential threat. So that's why we have to really avoid any military conflict in the region. That's the #1 priority. As to the second question on discussions on nuclear, so you mean about Japan's going nuclear, independent nuclear? Okay, yeah. So there is a small minority of people talking about Japan going nuclear these days, and if you take a poll, the support for going nuclear, independent nuclear capability is gradually increasing, but still less than 20%, which is much less than in South Korea. But it is gradually. It used to be, I think, less than 10%, but now it's going up gradually. And in the just last upper house election, the new political party, right-wing party, was talking about Japan going to nuclear, and nuclear capability is much cheaper than conventional capabilities. That sort of things really stirred up the debate in Japan. So if you look at the media reports, then it looks like Japan is really discussing nuclear capabilities, but independent nuclear capabilities. But still, I think it's very minority, and in the security community, it's not a mainstream idea. Of course, there are people who there are even more people, even in the security community, that call for independent nuclear capabilities, but still, it's not a mainstream. Mainstream thinking is that even if reliability of U.S. extended nuclear deterrence may decrease gradually over the next years, going independent nuclear is probably provides lesser deterrent capabilities. Even if reliability goes down, still relying on nuclear extended deterrence by the United States is better. So the condition that Japan would probably have to go nuclear is when Japan-US security alliance is really, really in danger. In that case, then we would have to go. We would have to really consider going nuclear independently. But right now, it's not that point, and I think that's how the mainstream thinking is.
What about if South Korea went nuclear? If South Korea went nuclear, would that be a condition that would change Japanese views?
Yeah, politically, yes. Yeah, because there's a tendency, even in any country, I think, if your neighbor is having something great or something looks fantastic, then you would want that. So that kind of thinking may increase in Japan. Actually, it is. The Japanese public is being influenced by the South Korean public debate, of course. That's I think one factor that is increasing the support in Japan for independent nuclear. But that's not really logical thinking. It's more like an emotional reaction. So I don't know if that would really be a major factor for Japan to decide to go independent nuclear.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Han.
Thank you very much for the question. Very big issue. I think the unification is out of question. I think it's going to be, push in that direction. Some people even, in China, they have already talked, some people talk about it's already on the way, started already. Not necessarily we think peaceful or with use of armed forces. It's maybe political agenda or other already started. But the official line is as peaceful as possible. Peaceful unification is they try best, but at the same time will not rule out the military, using military. So that's the basic line, official line. But talking about the two leaders in the United States and Japan, I think Trump, they have already got some reports, read the reports in the United States. Some people, they are suggesting, for example, Rand or the deputy Secretary of the Department of War. They talk about maybe it's time to really talk about some kind of arrangement between the two countries, the United States and China. Is how to say, because it's quite risky for the United States to moderately inside if there's some contingency or issue, conflict across the Taiwan Strait. So that's, but our understanding about Trump is businessman mentality. So deal, bargaining, or they talk about no other ideological or other. It's that's Trump. The Japanese new leader. I know you may well know what's going on now between China and Japan, because the statement made by the new leader talking about if something happened, they're going to be jump in. So that they really make the bilateral relations in a very conflicted, no, how to say, tension, at least. I hope, how to say, the tension will be diluted in the earliest. But I still think that's a big issue. That's really make the Chinese feel, public opinion in China really feel like, oh, you have to, how to say, solve the issue of Taiwan. How to say, the pressure among the public is really huge. The leadership, I think they have to really accommodate a little bit, but the big decision should be made with a very, how to say, very cautious, very careful consideration all the elements around this issue. So that's a basic.
Thank you. If you'd raise your hands. So we have a question on the third row on the end, the lady in the red jacket. Nearest me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I'm Margareta Kinnunen, a former Swiss MP, and I'm here for parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. As a European person born in Switzerland, I was quite shocked a couple of years ago when the then Prime Minister of United Kingdom launched from the England port the biggest ever built battleship by United Kingdom. Melissa, you mentioned European colonialism. This question goes to you. What does this battleship do in the Asia Pacific? I am deeply shocked. Second question, NATO. If each of you could say something about your relationship or not to NATO in the Asia Pacific area. Maybe you have a relationship, maybe none, knowing that NATO is, in my opinion, an aggressive nuclear military alliance. And thirdly, in Nagasaki, 1 month ago, there was a big international conference of the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. They stated a declaration, which you'll find on internet, which of course results in the final statement for the imperative elimination of nuclear arms. if each of you could just briefly say where will your country stand in 10 or 20 years with regard to the total abolition of nuclear arms? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some pretty meaty questions there. So yes, we will start with Melissa.
I'll do mine very quickly. So UK warship has indeed come through and done some time in the Indo-Pacific. I think given the arms race in the Indo-Pacific, what Europeans are doing or not doing is not making much of a difference, honestly. There's enough being built and developed. I mean, just this last month, Indonesia's talking about getting an aircraft carrier. I mean, what's happening in the region is what's happening in the region. NATO, Australia's always been a strong global partner, whatever that has been called at various points within NATO. We've deployed in Afghanistan. We are, at the moment, along with Japan, part of the Asia-Pacific Four that meet with NATO all the time. I think that's as much as we would want. And in terms of ban treaty, I'd love it if Australia could sign up because we have such a strong history on non-proliferation. I was reading something that Gareth Evans has recently written, reminding us of our history. But I think as a nuclear umbrella state, it's just impossible for us. We would have to push back against the US and make sure that nothing they deployed to Australia was nuclear, and that's just not realistic. When New Zealand did that, they fell out of the alliance.
Thank you. Professor Nishida, if you'd also be interested in commenting on the UK aircraft carrier. I know that Japan, UK have some interesting collaboration going on, but that's just an option for you. Please feel free to answer whichever questions you wish.
Yes, I'm not really sure about UK, but the relationship with NATO, that's very important for Japan these days, especially because the European security environment and the East Asian security environment is very much connected these days. And as you can see from Russia's cooperation, military technology cooperation with North Korea, and also China may be learning from Russia's war in Ukraine, and they may adopt a similar strategy in the case of Taiwan. If that's the case, then Japan would have to learn from NATO how NATO is responding in Europe. And also, as I said about how we can make sure we entangle the United States in case of China taking over Taiwan. If the US is so much focused on the European theater, then the US will have lesser resources to focus on Asia. So we would want NATO to see, we would want to see NATO more sort of strategic autonomous so that they can respond to the security threats in Europe independently, so that the United States can focus more on Asia. That kind of optimal sort of division of, deployment of military resources or security resources would have to take place hand in hand with NATO. So I think that's the kind of rationale that for Japan to be more interested in having a better, a deeper relationship with NATO, and I think vice versa is the same. And regarding the elimination of nuclear weapons, yes, we had a very big conference of the IPPNW Nagasaki just last month. And I personally very strongly support the elimination of nuclear weapons. And I'm sure that's the national aspiration as well. Even for the next 10 to 20 years, I can see Japan being sort of forced to have a deeper, or deepen the or strengthen sort of extended nuclear deterrence that might seem contradictory to the national aspiration of elimination of nuclear weapons. But I think people are coming to understand or coming to align these two things. Aspirationally, they are really strongly calling for elimination of nuclear weapons, but at the same time, they have to respond to the reality on the ground. So in that sense, we would have to strengthen extended nuclear deterrence, so that we don't have to go independent nuclear. But at the same time, Japan is probably keep the national aspiration for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, even in such a difficult security environment.
I answer the question about Asian NATO. I think since Shinzo Abe, he proposed the quad, not exactly the name at that time, but yeah, diamond, right, democratic diamond. I think in 2007, China made a very strong opposition on that initiative. So I think for some Chinese, they think that's maybe one way to show the nation NATO. So right after the 2017, when there's a sideline, higher ranking official meetings between the 4 countries in the United Nations, is the first time to be the level of foreign ministers. So at that time, China also felt like made a very strong opposition again, talking about maybe there's another way to the nation NATO. It's a really, how to say, undermining the stability in this region. So that's a basic view of China. Talking about the nuclear weapons, in 10 years, total elimination, I still think it's not that possible. Even I think the Chinese, from the first day of the first nuclear test, is complete disarmament and total elimination. But in the in the reality, I think now our problem is just don't want to have another round of a nuclear arms race. For example, the announcement of the resumption of a nuclear test. Don't do that. So just keep as low as possible to really play a role of a nuclear deterrence rather than war fighting. That's what I think is the most important thing. And also, I think the problem now, I think especially for myself, I think nuclear weapons really play a role to keep the big powers, nuclear weapon states, from a very direct conflict between themselves. But at the same time, the proxy war, we are talking about, for example, through the history of the Cold War or after, we really seen the proxy war. That's another way we feel like the nuclear weapon plays a very, not constructive, but very, how to say, stabilizing role, but it's the risk, nuclear risk is still there. How we can manage to really decrease of the nuclear risk is our arms controllers' work.
Thank you, Professor. I think that's a really good set of parting thoughts for us. We're now over time on the panel, so I'm afraid we can't field any more questions. I'd like to thank the members of the audience for their very thoughtful questions, and I'd really like to thank the members of the panel for tackling such a complex and wide-ranging set of issues so well. Thank you very much.